and I had to work a lot harder and start doing a lot of research on it. So my background is actually in public health and disease transmission and infection risks, and I did that in human populations. And while I was doing my PhD on that, my beekeeping hobby grew out of control, and I started to realize there's all these similarities between, I mean, there's plenty of differences, but a lot of the same things that are happening in human health are happening to bees, and it's a heck of a lot easier to study it in bees because you can just give them the disease, which they have problems with that policy-wise if you do to humans. So I started to do research on honeybee disease transmission at Michigan State as a postdoc, and now I'm there as a research associate appointment. But on the side, in my free time, I do still do a queen rearing business, and I sell nukes, and we have about 250, 300 hives that I do, which is too many for me, I have discovered this year. So, and so just when we were talking, right before we were talking about, like, a lot of people really stuck in like a perpetual beginner state, or still kind of being plateaued where they are with their beekeeping. And one of the big things that I find in a lot of, so I used to do consults too and go to people's hives and help them out, and a lot of mentoring, and a lot of colonies, they'll instantly blame the queen for a lot of things, and a lot of times it's disease. And I'm sorry too, I have a very little voice, and this is about as much as we get. So if you are having, I'm not offended if you guys want to move up. Okay, you're okay? And so I was seeing a lot of disease. And one of the things that Randy and I were talking about is that he sees a lot of disease too, but for him it's fine. And a lot of this stuff just handles. And a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk to you about, he doesn't think is very important. And I'm absolutely fine with that. And some of it may not be, but some of it too I think is going to be dependent where your tolerances are. So if you've got 2 hives and one of them gets sick, and especially if it's your little bee Anne and you really like her and she was your favorite queen, that's very different than if you have 3,000 hives and you've just got a healthy one you can put it on. The other thing too is, for me raising queens, I have a closed operation. I don't move my bees around, and I have very low tolerance for disease because I can't. And then the other thing too is there's a really big difference if you've got winter coming up. In the springtime, so some of these things in the springtime, not that important. If I see a disease, you can give it lots of time. This time of year though, for me, this is the make or break. If they're not healthy at this time of year, it's a really big deal. So the stuff I'm going to talk about today is kind of, Randy covered a lot of it, and that's great because it's really good to have stuff repeated. But I'm just going to talk about basically these theoretical things about dealing with honeybee diseases and what they are. Okay, and the big thing, all my stuff, I raised all my stuff up to the top because last time I gave a talk, the bottom got cut off, so this will be nice. There we go. You can do nice things too. All right, so the difference that I'm talking, how many people have kept bees for less than 5 years? Less than 10? Okay, more than that? Okay, good. So there's a fairly good mix. So the biggest thing, I don't know if it's the same here, but we call people bee havers versus derogatorily. Okay. And that's, for me, that's the biggest difference to get people out of that rut, is when you actually turn to taking care of your bees. And it's a lot more than just having them in the backyard. So there's lots of aspects to that, managing wax buildup and food and things like that. But I'm just going to talk about it on the disease front, because I think that does get ignored a lot. Okay, so I'm just going to talk about why you need to care about disease, basic principles of pathogen transmission, hive hygiene, and then how you actually deal with a sick hive when you see it. One of the reasons I started giving this talk is obviously lots of people have these high losses. This is the Bee Informed Partnership that reports, this is from last year, but somewhere around 40% annual losses. And a lot of things that people cite that are involved in that, neonics, CCD, Monsanto, Big Ag, and people blame all these things. And I gave a talk once and someone was like, yeah, but what about Monsanto? And I was like, well, I'm really thrilled that you think I can take down Monsanto first. But like, the thing about a lot of these is you can't do a lot about them. And there's a lot of things. This is things that affect bee populations, and there is these farmer practices, and there is pesticides, and there's climate change that we can't, we're at the point where we just have to accept that that change is happening. But there's a lot of stuff right in here that you can change. So there are, like, a lot of beekeepers, when they hear all these bad things, they just want to throw up their hands or blame it on someone else. And a lot of the colonies that I'm inspect, like, people are actually doing things. They're not recognizing things that they can make it better. So I really like to focus on things that you can do to actually make your colonies better. So I said that one of my perspectives is coming as an epidemiologist. My other one is raising other livestock. So we manage a small livestock farm. This is my old flock of sheep. That's Inez in the front. She's my Judas sheep. And so we do a lot of animal raising. And for me, the bees are some of the animals that are on our farm. They produce a honey crop, but we keep them in good health. Oh, the answer there is yes. I mean, technically, honeybees are animals. They're obviously very different, especially in breeding and in disease management, because you do have the superorganism, but they still are animals. And that can kind of inform your care. So I use this when I teach my beginner beekeeping class, because I say like a colony can grow up to be like a 15-pound animal, which is basically like a small dog when you think about the food and the water needs. If you Google image search dog in bee costume, you'll be amazed at your options. There's like thousands. You can spend a lot of time. This one's particularly cute, I think. But you can spend a lot of time looking at. Also, for the next talk, dogs driving tractors. there's so many videos. Okay, so your dogs need water. Your dogs need water. Your bees also need water. A big thriving colony on these hot days. I have a water route at my house for my chickens. It's just filled with bees. A colony will use quarts of water a day if it's cooling or if it just needs it because they're animals. They need shelter. Obviously, we provide that at the hive. They need food. And when they get sick, they might need medical care. Because bees can get viruses, they can get bacteria, they can get microsporidial. This is the nosema. It's now classified as a microsporidia. Fungal diseases, amoebas, they can get all of these things. Just like you and I can get all these things, your dogs can get all these things, your sheep can get all these things. So your bees can get sick. Same thing though, is some of them are a lot worse than others. You can get a cold, or you can even get viruses that don't cause anything. Same thing that can happen to your bees. All right. One of the big things that's happening with bees right now is the fact that they are encountering what we call emerging pathogens. So this figure is, these are the different types of species, or the different species of bees. You can see most of them are in Southeast Asia. This is the current range of Apis mellifera, our honeybee. And what you can see here is that they overlap a lot. And they didn't overlap initially, which means that we're having a lot of species, or a lot of these pathogens are shifting hosts. And this is one of the really common myths. You don't have to get so angry about it. It is sad, though. So one of the really common myths we see all the time on the internets and the treatment-free Facebook page is that honeybees have been fine for thousands of years and they just need to be left alone. And there's a couple issues with that. So first off, they have not been fine in North America. And one of the big issues with bees is getting stress. And if you've got bees, especially if you're replacing bees every single year from California or the South and bringing them to New York, then you maybe have bees that are under a lot more stress because they're just not from here. And a lot of these new pathogens, they haven't had time to develop strategies or immunity against many of these new pathogens. A lot of them have been in the populations for decades, or maybe even less. We're still finding some of them, and there's still some that we don't even know what they are. And so a lot of these, they just haven't had time to deal with them. So when you leave them alone, it's not necessarily that they're going to be fine. Okay, so why do we actually need to care about them? One is they're animals. And I know that not everybody extends ethical consideration to invertebrates, and that's fine. However, on our farm, if it's an animal under our care, it's in good health. And that's the way our philosophy is. Honey production. It's a lot harder to make honey off of a sick colony. If you don't have foragers, or if everybody's trying, if you don't have an input of foragers at the time you need it, you're not going to make honey. And especially in areas with short seasons, we have a really big problem in Michigan right now where colonies that are coming off of blueberry pollination just seem to automatically get European fallbird. Well, right after blueberry pollination, they go out to their honey production yard. If while on blueberries, they're not making enough larvae, which are turning into their nurse bees, which are going to turn into their foragers a few weeks later, they're not going to have the field force to get honey production. So what we're seeing now is that people are just stopping to go blueberries because their colony is so sick, they will lose all the money that they would make in honey. So they can kind of do one or the other, and with honey prices going back up, they're choosing honey, and now our blueberry growers are calling me all freaked out about it. Queen longevity. So you hear these stories of these 7-year-old queens that used to happen in the good old days. And I don't know if that's true, because if you read old stuff, people are always blaming queen longevity or complaining about it. But sick queens, especially we know with nosema, they get replaced. So now, that's nurse bees. So that first generation is suffering. That second generation is suffering, which means they fed someone poorly. So you have one period where your bees are starving, and they're going to be in rough shape for a little bit potentially. And if that drought continues, or if you don't put in feed in there, you can have multiple generations, and then you've got a whole series of stressed bees. So this is probably one of the most important things about it. And this is something too, like when we talk about the beekeeper practices, making sure your colony has food is one of the things you have control over. You know, it's not big eggs' fault or colony collapse disorder if your colony is just flat out starving because there's a huge drought going on, or you didn't leave enough for winter. So that's something that you have absolute control over. And so when I go out to a colony, I go out and I check for 4 things in my inspections: queen rate, space, having enough food, and then any sign of disease. And I can do that on my 2 frames or whatever within less than 1 minute. But this is one of the most important things for transmitting disease. And so what you're looking at, we talked about these lots of royal jelly. You want to see them absolutely swimming in it. And like what we're seeing now is that we don't have this nice ring of pollen. Like at minimum, and people always ask me, well, what's the minimum that they need? And there isn't like a set minimum like per this, at least that I know of. Randy can tell me later that I'm wrong or which study I didn't read. But at least you want to make sure that there's a surplus. Because if there's not a surplus, then you're pollen limited, right? If they're not storing it, then you know by definition they don't have enough. And you want to make sure that there's a surplus of food. Bees act very differently if there's surpluses of stored food in the colony versus when they know that there's no food going on and that they're under duress. Okay, so we can't really do much to protect the individual bee. We can't really do a ton to protect the colony except for food. Within apiary transmission is our next level, and there are a few things that we can do. So looking at how you get a disease to move from colony to colony. I put the drone up there because they usually get the most blame for drifting, but everybody drifts. Lots of bees, workers drift a lot more than people think they do. So how is this set up for reducing drifting? Sorry if this is from Google Image, sorry if it's your hive, but not great, right? I mean, they're all exactly uniform, they're all exactly in a line, you've just got rows of them. And you'll see, if you've got colonies that are all in a line and they're all painted the same, a lot of times this one on this end will be a lot bigger, and a lot of times the food source is that way. And you'll find, like the same thing, if you're coming home and you've got this huge row, that distended abdomen, and you're gonna see this entrance, you'll be like, this is fine. You know, I'm just gonna set it down there. And those bees that are at those guard bees, like if you show up at my house with an armload of pies, like you can come right on in. You know, and if there are bees that are showing up with an armload of food, they can come right on in. And so a lot of times you'll see, especially with foragers, they'll be able to drift 2 colonies quite a bit. So that's where, I mean, a lot of the disease happens. So how do you reduce that? You guys, Tom Seeley's around here. He's like, what's that?
Mark them differently.
You mark them differently? What else? Spread them out. Paint them different colors. Point them different directions. I mean, in this case, the pallets are a little bit nicer because at least you've got some going other directions, but just doing little things to reduce the drifting. I mean, ideally, you'd have them each one 100 yards apart in different colors and things like that. But in a yard, maybe not having them all look the same and be in a row. All right, in beekeepers is vectors too. And this is where Randy wants me to put a disclaimer that I have no data to support this. However, one of the people that I work with quite a lot is a veterinarian. And one of the things that I worked on for a lot of my transmission work is looking at fomites and bacteria and viruses that can live not an enormous length of time, but some time on surfaces. And so while you're moving from colony to colony, you know, you're sticking your hand in there. And especially if you're mushing bees with your fingers or with your hive tool, is paying attention to your hive hygiene as you move from colony to colony. Because basically there's two things that are allowing it to go from this colony to this colony. It's either the bees moving it or it's the beekeeper moving it. So hive tool. If I have a sick yard, I do use a different hive tool. It says danger, danger on it. And that's if I have a colony, like when I have one that has foul brood. I have a quarantine yard and it gets its own hive tool. You can clean it with alcohol. You can flame it in your smoker or with your lighter. I light my smoker with a propane torch, and all I do is just put a pass over my hive tool at that period. And I mean, you should, like as a beekeeper, you always have fire out there. So it's a very, very easy, and they're metal, so it's very easy to clean. A lot harder to clean are your hands, just washing your hands. And especially this is, after you work a really diseased hive, this is not something that I do between every single hive when I'm inspecting. But if I open up a hive and it's suspect and it's really bad, washing your hands before when you go to the next one. I keep Purell or just an alcohol spray in my truck. If you can use these nitrile gloves, that's way better, just because you can dispose of them. These leather ones are really hard to clean. If you're not at the point where you're comfortable going without gloves, and you're not at the point going here, some people I know use the dishwashing gloves. They say that they won't sting through there. Or if you've got a quarantine yard, at least have a danger pair of gloves or swap them out. And a lot of things I'm talking about, like, if these are like $20 and your whole bee yard worth of bees is way too much money, it's your bass boat sitting right there, then you want to think about, maybe it hurts to throw them away. The other thing that's really important that's going from colony to colony is all your stuff. So we can have things in honey and pollen and wax and frames and woodenware and feeders. And this is why it's really important to at least know the difference between a healthy colony and a non-healthy colony. People move stuff all the time. I make up nukes, I am moving frames around all the time. But that's why I have such a low tolerance for diseases. I'm not moving around stuff if I see chalk brood in it or if I think that there's a chance that it had American foul brood or anything like that. So if you don't trust yourself on the ability to recognize diseases, you don't want to be doing a lot of this moving things around. And I'm going to talk about this. And then when you're getting old equipment, and Randy talked about this a little bit, really the decision I make or how I handle old equipment, like dead outs in the spring, is it my equipment or is it not my equipment? And basically what I mean is there a potential that it could have American foul brood, or does it not likely have American foul brood?